The taxi driver threw me out of the car like I was trash, tossing my bag onto the sidewalk without a second thought. He had no idea who I was, or how much his life was about to spiral out of control. What started as a simple ride turned into a story the entire internet couldn't stop talking about. But let's start from the beginning. It was just another night in Manhattan, where the streets buzzed with honking cabs and impatient pedestrians. 16-year-old Barron Trump stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, a figure too polished for the chaos around him. His sleek Balenciaga coat practically screamed out of place, while the designer bag slung casually over his shoulder looked like it cost more than most people's rent. He stood there like a lost character from a movie about the misfortunes of the ultra-rich. A yellow cab screeched to a stop beside him, its brakes protesting like they had a story of their own. Behind the wheel was a stocky man in his 50s, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen one too many bad days. His name tag read Charlie, and his expression teetered between boredom and subtle annoyance as he leaned out of the window. "Where to?" he barked, his voice as rough as his stubble. "Park Avenue," Barron replied, his tone calm but firm. He opened the door and slid into the back seat, quickly pulling out his phone to reply to a message from his mom. Charlie glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. He'd seen this type before, or at least he thought he had. Rich kid, fancy clothes. Probably a trust fund somewhere. The kind of passenger who thought tipping was optional. The cab jerked forward as Charlie hit the gas, muttering something under his breath that Barron either didn't hear or chose to ignore. But just a few blocks in, the car came to an abrupt halt at a red light, and Charlie twisted around in his seat to face him. "Hey, kid," Charlie said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You got cash? Because this ain't a free limo service." Barron looked up from his phone, blinking in mild confusion. "Yes, of course. Can you just keep driving?" Charlie let out a sharp laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be funny. "You look like one of those kids who think the world owes them something. Newsflash, it doesn't. I'm not your chauffeur, and I don't drive freeloaders." Barron frowned, his calm demeanor starting to crack. "I'm not a freeloader, I told you. I have money." But Charlie wasn't listening. His frustration had reached a boiling point, and Barron was just the unlucky target of his bad mood. "Get out," Charlie said, yanking the cab to the curb so abruptly that Barron nearly dropped his phone. Before the teenager could say another word, Charlie was out of the car, opening the back door and tossing Barron's bag onto the pavement. "Out," Charlie growled, "and take your 'I'm better than everyone else's' attitude with you." Barron stood there, stunned for a moment, as curious onlookers began to slow down, their gazes flickering between the scowling driver and the impeccably dressed teenager. One bystander even pulled out their phone, the soft glow of the camera unmistakable in the dim light. Barron bent down to pick up his bag, brushing off the dirt and straightening his coat with an air of quiet defiance. There was no yelling, no theatrics, just a flicker of something in his eyes. Determination, maybe, or something sharper. Charlie climbed back into his cab, muttering under his breath as he drove off, convinced he'd just put a spoiled kid in his place. Little did he know, his night was far from over. An hour later, Barron sat in his family's living room, recounting the story with the kind of calm that only made it more infuriating to hear. His mom, Melania, paced back and forth, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen as she listened. Her expression shifted between disbelief and controlled anger, but her voice remained steady. "And he threw your bag?" she asked, her accent cutting through her words like a blade. "Just threw it?" "Yes, Mom," Barron replied, his tone even. "And he called me a... well, you don't want to hear the rest." Donald Trump, who had been sitting quietly in his chair, suddenly stood up. If there was one thing he didn't tolerate, it was someone disrespecting his family. His eyes narrowed, and his trademark scowl deepened. "That's unacceptable," he said, his voice sharp and commanding. "Nobody treats my son like that," and walks away. Barron raised an eyebrow, almost amused by the sudden shift in energy. "Dad, it's fine. I handled it." But Donald wasn't having it. "No, Barron, it's not fine. This guy thinks he can humiliate people because he's behind the wheel of a cab? Not on my watch." Melania nodded in agreement, already scrolling through her contacts. "We'll take care of this," she said, her tone icy. "Trust me." Meanwhile, across town, Charlie was wrapping up his shift. The night had been long, and his encounter with Barron was barely a blip on his radar. As he parked his cab outside his apartment building, he let out a sigh of relief, ready to call it a day. But as he approached the entrance, a man in a sharp black suit stepped out of the shadows. "Charlie Waters?" the man asked, his voice calm but with an edge that made the hairs on Charlie's neck stand up. Charlie froze mid-step. Yeah, who's asking?" The man didn't bother with introductions. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and handed Charlie an envelope. "This is for you," he said, his tone as cold as his piercing stare. Charlie hesitated before taking it. As he unfolded the paper inside, his face turned as pale as the moonlight reflecting off the nearby car windows. It was a court summons, filed under the name Barron William Trump. "What is this?" Charlie stammered, though he already knew the answer. His heart sank as he realized the magnitude of what he had done. The man in the suit didn't stick around to explain. "You'll want to get a lawyer," he said before walking away, leaving Charlie standing there in stunned silence. By the time Charlie made it upstairs, his phone was buzzing non-stop. He ignored it at first, but curiosity got the better of him. When he finally checked, his heart dropped. There it was, a video of his altercation with Barron, captured by a passerby, and now making rounds on every social media platform imaginable. The caption read, "Taxi driver throws kid out of cab, regrets it instantly when he sees who it is." The comments were brutal. "This guy's career is over. Imagine treating someone like that just because they're young. Karma's coming for him." Charlie felt the weight of the internet's collective rage pressing down on him. By morning, the video had gone viral, with millions of views and thousands of angry comments. As he stepped out of his apartment, bleary-eyed and dreading the day ahead, he was immediately swarmed by reporters. "Mr. Waters, do you think your actions were justified?" one shouted, shoving a microphone in his face. "Do you regret what you said to that teenager?" asked another. Charlie tried to push past them, mumbling something about being late for work, but his words were lost in the chaos. By the time he made it to the cab company's office, his boss was waiting for him with a grim expression. The room was tense, the kind of tension that only meant bad news. "Charlie," his boss said, shaking his head, "we need to talk." A few days later, Charlie sat in a cold, sterile conference room, the kind of place where bad news always seemed to hit harder. Across the table sat a man who could have been plucked straight from a legal drama, crisp suit, perfectly styled hair, and a calm intensity that screamed, "I'm about to make your life very complicated." This was Mark Sterling, one of the sharpest lawyers the Trump family had on speed dial. Charlie shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the weight of his own mistakes settling in his chest like a brick. "So, Mr. Waters," Mark began, his voice smooth but unyielding, "let's get straight to the point. You've put yourself, and frankly everyone else around you, in a very awkward position." Charlie tried to interject, his voice barely above a mumble. "Look, I didn't know who he was." Mark raised a hand, cutting him off. "It doesn't matter who he was. What matters is what you did, and the entire world knows about it now." There was a pause, long enough to make Charlie squirm. "You have two choices," Mark continued, his tone now razor-sharp. "One, you issue a public apology, on camera, sincere, remorseful, the whole package. Or two, we move forward with a lawsuit that will cost you not just your job, but everything else you hold dear. And trust me, it won't be a small number." Charlie swallowed hard. He could feel the walls closing in, every bit of bravado he once had now reduced to dust. He nodded slowly, barely able to meet Mark's gaze. I'll apologize," he muttered. Mark leaned back in his chair, a faint smile of victory crossing his face. "Good choice." The next day, Charlie found himself standing in front of a wall of cameras, the bright lights making him sweat under his ill-fitting suit. He clutched a piece of paper with trembling hands, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. But there was none. Taking a deep breath, he began. "I want to publicly apologize for my actions last week," he said, his voice shaky but audible. "What I did was wrong, and I deeply regret the way I treated Mr. Barron Trump. It was unprofessional and unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for my behavior." The words felt like gravel in his mouth, but he forced them out, hoping it would all be over soon, When the camera stopped rolling, Charlie let out a sigh of relief, but the relief was short-lived. Despite the apology, the damage was already done. The video of his outburst had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of poor judgment and unchecked frustration. Social media continued to roast him, with memes, comments, and hashtags keeping the story alive. The cab company, desperate to salvage its reputation, made a swift decision. "Charlie, we're letting you go," his boss said bluntly during a tense meeting. "We can't afford this kind of bad press." And just like that, Charlie was out of a job. Meanwhile, Barron, ever composed, decided to address the situation in his own way. He took to his social media platform, posting a simple yet profound message. "Everyone makes mistakes. I hope this incident serves as a reminder to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their age, status, or appearance." The post went viral within hours, racking up millions of likes and comments, praising his maturity and grace. "Class act," one commenter wrote. "He handled this better than most adults would," said another. Barron's response only cemented his reputation as someone wise beyond his years, while Charlie found himself grappling with the fallout of his actions. With no job, a tarnished name, and plenty of time to reflect, Charlie was left to ponder the weight of one impulsive decision. In the end, the story served as a stark reminder. Sometimes, one moment of poor judgment is all it takes to turn your world upside down. What would you have done in Charlie's place? Do you think he handled it the best way he could, or could he have done something differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever been in a similar situation? Let us know, and don't forget to leave a like if you found this story thought-provoking. This story is meant to shed light on the importance of respect and empathy, reminding us how small actions can have big consequences. Together, we can work toward a kinder, better world. Your opinion matters. Let's make a difference.